himself to the stream.
Yeah.
Okay, we're live.
I don't think you guys were live.
No, we were not.
Yeah, you're live now. All right.
They told me to hold off.
Here, we're going to go through our whole spiel. Sorry for the delay, everybody. What is it? 3 after 7. Normally, we start right at 7. I think this is the first time we've ever been late.
8.
And we're late for a good reason. We'll get to that in a moment. But thank you for joining Museum Ship Mafia, where we take you behind the scenes of the museum ships across the country and around the world. My name is Ken Stano with the YouTube channel History X and the website www.historyxchannel.com. Thank you for watching. So tonight, it's another live crossover broadcast. We've got 3 YouTube channels like normal, the USS Slater, the Buffalo Naval Park, and of course, my YouTube channel, History X. So tonight, and let me get this pulled up while I'm kind of scrambling here. So tonight, we're going to be talking about, and I've been kind of advertising it for the last week or so, we're going to be talking about damage control. And I've always been kind of fascinated with this subject, but I never really could figure out a good way to talk about it until I came across a book that we're going to be talking about tonight called Trial by Fire by a guy by the name of P.T. Duderman. He sounds like he knows what he's talking about, so I'm glad to have him join us tonight. And of course, helping me as always, the guys that you saw on the screen a few moments ago, talking about Shane Stevenson from the Buffalo Naval Park. We've got John Epp from the USS Slater, and of course, Connor Kilgore handling the comments and questions, like I say, the levers and dials behind the scenes. He's with the Alexander Henry Coast Guard Museum ship, Coast Guard Icebreaker Museum ship in Thunder Bay, Ontario. So how was that for scrambling, guys?
That was great. Yeah, good job.
Yeah. So, all right. So the reason we were late is because, like I said, we're going to be covering damage control, and I'm going to pull this screen back up here, but not just talking about damage control on various ships. We're going to actually be talking about the USS Franklin, the carrier USS Franklin, which has a hell of a story. And there's a really good way, in my opinion, of learning about this story by reading the historical fiction novel by a guy by the name of P.T. Duderman called Trial by Fire. And he goes really in depth into the whole scenario behind the bombing of the USS Franklin. So I don't know. What do you guys want to do a quick review, or you want to just bring them on?
So let's go for it.
All right, we're bringing them on. Okay, so we've got P.T. Duderman here. Pete, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. All right, this might work after all. So, hey, I've read a ton of your books. I'm thrilled to have you on tonight, and I appreciate you doing all the emailing back and forth to join us. We're thrilled to have you. So, how can you hear us? All right?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, then let's just dive right into it, if you don't mind. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about the USS Franklin, the carrier USS Franklin, which was commissioned, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 1943, and is an Essex-class carrier that went to sea and went to battle in the Pacific. Now, it was originally hit by a kamikaze attack, but that's not what we're going to be talking about tonight, because it actually made it back for repairs and then went back to sea fully fit, and then it was bombed. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So,
yeah, Ken, if I'm not mistaken, she was hit 3 times in October of 44.
Correct.
And then went back to Puget Sound, and then the big one in March of 45 that the book covers.
Yes.
Right?
So
welcome, Captain. Thank you for being here.
PT, thanks for joining us. And let me get into a little bit of PT's background, because I think he's pretty fascinating. First of all, he attended the Naval Academy, and he was commissioned as an officer and first served aboard the USS Morton, which is a destroyer, DD-948. but he also served aboard swift boats during Vietnam, as well as the USS Hull. So he's got some pretty deep experience to lean on, and he moved his way up through guided missile cruisers. He served aboard the USS, is it the Jouet? Is that how you pronounce it, PT? Jouet?
Jouet, yep.
All right. In the Pacific Fleet, he attended the Naval War College. He worked at the Pentagon. He was assigned to the Pentagon for several years, became executive officer aboard the guided missile cruiser USS CF Adams, and then he assumed command of the guided missile destroyer Tatnall, DDG-19.
Right.
But of course, he didn't stop there. He was appointed as a technical delegate to the United Nations. He participated in arms negotiations with the Soviets in Geneva before he ever published his first book. So this guy's got some history. I don't know.
That's a resume.
Do you think he's qualified to talk to us tonight? He might just be. So your first book was written in 1992. But Trial by Fire, that was just published, what? That was 2 years ago, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So what made you want to write a book about the bombing of the USS Franklin?
Because I came into possession of the USS Franklin's running lights. Yeah. It's an interesting story. My father was the commander of the Eastern Sea Frontier and therefore also commander of the Atlantic Reserve Fleet. She'd been put in mothballs after the war. There was a chief petty officer on the Franklin who was in charge of keeping her safe as a part of the mothball fleet. He called my father, whom he knew, and said, I have been told the Franklin's going to the scrapyard. Would you like a memento from the ship? And my dad said, sure. So this chief sent my father the running lights, the physical red and green running lights from the Franklin. He turned them over to me, and for several years I had them, which is when I went and learned about what happened to the Franklin and what a horror show it was. These running lights had obviously been repaired and there were weld beads on them, but I plugged them into a 110 volt circuit at my farm in Georgia and they came on. The running lights had 3 separate filaments. Now they were meant to be run by 220, so they were dim, but they actually still worked. This is 1965, 66. I kept them for a while, and then the Naval Supply School up in Athens, Georgia, had a World War II museum. So I said, hey guys, would you like to have these? And by the way, they work. Yes was the answer. So I took them up to Athens. They plugged them in and had them on display in this museum in Athens, Georgia, with the lights on. Now, when the supply school moved to Pensacola, Florida, they no longer had room for a museum. So they handed them over to the Navy History Museum, which was so chock-a-block with memorabilia, things, items, they couldn't begin to display everything they had. So they sent them to a warehouse in Suitland, Maryland, where they are now. And about 2 years ago, I called up the warehouse, the history director at the warehouse, and said, I'd like to get them back. He said, sure. All you got to do is come up here. Great. And find them.
Right.
And I said, find them? Yeah. He said, we got 150,000 items here and they're not cataloged. So get a bottle of water and we'll let you walk through the warehouse. If you see them, call me and I'll get them out of the warehouse and hand them back to you. So that was my association with the Franklin.
Wait. Did you ever find them?
I never went up there because I called again and I talked to a secretary. I said, how hard is this? And she said, how much time you got? I said, well, it would probably take you a month.
Oh,
to get
geez.
through all the stuff that they have warehoused here in Suitland, Maryland, to find these things. And you might stumble on them immediately, but you might never find them. And I said, okay, one fine day.
So you just decided to write then without finding the running lights, but you already had a fascination with the Franklin, so you just
Correct.
decided to write the book anyway.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to do the research for this book?
Well, in my business, I try to get a book out every year. So I spend 3 months or so doing the research. And at a certain point, because the research is always fascinating, I have to say, okay, cut it off. And as they say in the literary business, put ass to chair and start writing the book. And I mean, that's literally how it goes. I've got one coming out on Iwo Jima this November. I knew all about Iwo Jima. Everybody knows all about Iwo Jima until I started doing the research. And then I realized I don't know anything about what actually happened there. But at a certain point, you got to stop and say, okay, get going, write the book. It takes me about 6 months to write it. And then the production process takes about 6 months, and then bring it out the next year.
Now, one of the things that I found most interesting about the book is the way it starts out, which is the Franklin's put back to sea after being hit by kamikazes, right? So a lot of damage had to be repaired. And you start the book off by, I believe, sending a couple of ensigns basically on a wild goose chase with some architectural drawings of the ship, trying to find out, are the water mains, I think it was the firefighting water mains, are they the way the plans worked out? Basically, are the plans accurate?
Right.
And so you start off in a pretty technical approach. Did that actually make you nervous to start a book off that way? I mean, a lot of people find that boring. I found it fascinating.
No, and that's when I had command of the Tatnall, which was a guided missile destroyer. We were off coast of Lebanon, and we had a very bad fire. And it was a fire in the missile fire control system, part of the superstructure. Didn't look like that, but it was a very, very bad fire. And one of our problems was we did not have the drawings that should have followed a major systems upgrade, because it takes the shipyard about 2 years to actually get the drawings done. So what they were doing on the Franklin was saying, all right, we've been repaired. They put some new firefighting systems in on the hangar deck. And are these drawings that we have still correct? And they were not, of course. They were nothing like it. And so they wanted to find out, how right is it or how wrong is it? And that's what they were doing. When the book starts, they realized that the drawings that they'd had before the kamikaze attacks were no longer correct.
And that was based on research that you had done on the Franklin?
Yeah. And from personal experience. When you do a major complex overhaul on a ship and change everything in, say, the missile fire control system, you're not going to get drawings for a couple of years. And it didn't seem to matter, except when the fire broke out in those same systems, we had no idea how to get, for instance, the electrical power shut off to where the fire was. Because by design, missile fire control systems being a critical combat system, if you lose power in those spaces, there are several ways by which power is automatically restored. So if you're trying to turn the electricity off while you fight a fire that has set your aluminum superstructure on fire, the metal was burning, you can't do it without knowing where all this power is coming from. And that was what I faced. And I figured that's exactly what they faced on the Franklin. They had no correct plans.
And so let's get into the attack on the Franklin. I've got a ton of photos from the incident, which actually occurred, I believe, March 19th of 1945. So it's towards the end of World War II. The Japanese are on their heels, but the fight isn't out of them by any way, shape, or form. And so a Japanese dive bomber gets through the screening ships and drops a couple of 550-pound bombs, which land right on the deck and immediately start an intense fire because did I miss something?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Oh, that was Connor making the noise. So it starts an intense fire because the deck was full of Corsairs getting ready to take off with armed with missiles and full fuel tanks. So this intense blaze starts and creates this list on the Franklin.
The list was created by firefighting water, believe it or not. What happened was this plane was called a Judy. He had 2 bombs on board. One was a semi-armor piercing bomb. One was a conventional 500-pound bomb, both of which penetrated the flight deck. And what began the catastrophe was down on the flight deck, since they were in the middle of a launch and did not have enough room up on the deck for all the planes that were going to go on the launch. They had stashed some planes down on the hangar deck, fully fueled and fully armed. Now, by doctrine, that was never done for this precise reason. You never armed and you never fueled the planes until you brought them up to the flight deck. You did not want, high-octane gasoline and a lot of ordnance down in the hangar deck. But that's what they had. And these 2 bombs went down and set all of that off in one catastrophic explosion. It was so big, there was a deck that was between the flight deck and the hangar deck, and it was called the gallery deck. And it was a deck that had ready rooms and combat information centers. It didn't go the whole length of the ship. The explosion was so vast that it took that gallery deck and compressed it up against the flight deck, basically squishing everybody who was on the gallery deck. And the instant death. It was that big a bang. Then the stuff up on the flight deck started to let go. These were planes loaded with rockets, bombs, and most of all, high-octane aviation gasoline. And from then on, it was just a catastrophe. Everything was burning. Everything was exploding. The hangar deck, the deck that you walk on the hangar deck, was armored. None of this got through the armored deck to the decks below. So she was not ever experiencing any flooding. And in damage control, there's a basic rule. You always address flooding before you address fire. Why? Because there's an infinite source of flooding water all around you, all the ocean. So it doesn't matter if you get the fires put out if the damn ship sinks. So, but that's not what happened to Franklin. Franklin, the hangar deck blew up. Absolutely just blew up and deformed the hangar deck, killed hundreds of people who were down there, killed everybody on the gallery deck. And these were flight crews ready to go up to the flight deck and man their planes. They were just sitting there in their ready rooms. And the deck that they were sitting on went up to the overhead and flattened them, killed them all, everybody. And that, I've got a picture on my screen now. I don't know if you can see it, of her listing. Was after several hours of fighting the fires, the water from the firefighting efforts went down into the hangar deck and streamed down into the ship, into the main machinery spaces, into living spaces. The list on the ship, she was never in danger of sinking from the bombing. Mm-hmm. There was so much water. And remember, there were a cruiser alongside, destroyers alongside, all pumping water onto this fire. And the water had to go somewhere, didn't go off the ship, went in the ship. That's why you see the list.
Yeah, and there was a picture. Where the heck was that? Showing. I think it was the next one. I think it was the Santa Fe.
Yeah.
That was next to. There it is.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was. I
Yeah.
didn't know if that was the Santa Fe or the Pittsburgh.
Well, Pittsburgh took her under tow.
Correct.
Santa Fe came alongside. It was so bad she had to back out. And then the skipper of the Santa Fe said, "To hell with this." And he came back in and he collided with the starboard side of the Franklin, which locked the two ships together, damaging Santa Fe. But by doing that, guys could jump off the sponsons and the flight deck to get away from the fire and jump onto the Santa Fe. And the Santa Fe's firefighting systems could actually play on the fires on the Franklin. This picture here was the first effort of her coming alongside trying to help with the fires. Didn't work. So she backed out and then came back in and brought it right alongside, grinding steel, hull to hull, antennas snapping off, lifelines snapping off, and held his ship alongside Franklin so the people could jump out of the burning fires. Pittsburgh was a heavy cruiser, and she came up front of the Franklin and took her under tow. They were only 85 miles or so from Japan. So Pittsburgh took her under tow and tried to get her the hell away from Japan.
Yeah, here are a couple of pictures of the Santa Fe, like you said, just rammed right up next to the Franklin. The lower edge, there was I think it was like a 12-degree pitch to the deck. And so here's the Santa Fe trying, and here's the other aspect of the story, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, here's another picture of the Santa Fe with a line going across. You can see them trying to get patients from the carrier to the cruiser. So the pictures are fascinating. But what I want to go to, that is a key part of the story. The reason why the Santa Fe was there. Let me see if I can find this. Are these pictures right here? All of the, or I shouldn't say all of the, but quite a few of the crew that were on the flight deck had to go to the bow, because what you see in this picture, that wall of white behind them, is actually the blaze, that was kind of behind the island, correct?
Yeah, and the other part of it was a lot of these airplanes were armed with these 11.75-inch rockets. And these rockets would get heated up and would launch from the wings of the airplane and fly straight up the flight deck at about 3 foot off the flight deck. And guys who got in the way of one of those were cut in half. Then there were all the 20 millimeter and 50 caliber guns on these airplanes. That started going off, pointed, of course, straight up ahead. They couldn't stay there. They just couldn't stay there. They were getting killed. This is one of the big issues on the Franklin, that almost 1,000 men of the crew left the ship, jumped in the water, were picked up by Santa Fe, picked up by destroyers. And when it came down to the final damage control efforts, there were only about 500 out of 3,000 effectives aboard the carrier to fight the fires and to try to reconstitute the ship. They'd been blown off. They'd left.
Now, before I invited you to join us here tonight, I gave the guys the reading assignment of the book. So Connor read the book. What's that?
Want to test?
Well, not necessarily test, but I want to give these guys a chance. I've been hitting you with questions, and of course I've been a fan of yours. But so Shane, John, Connor, at this particular point of the story, did you guys have any questions for Pete here?
Yeah. So one thing that I found quite interesting was you wrote it as, how do I describe it? I guess almost a historical fiction. You write it as if it was a story rather than a lot of history books I've read. Was that that a choice that you kind of made early on, where you thought that I'm going to write it in this way instead of more traditional history book style?
Yeah, I've been doing that. I've been out of the Navy and writing books for longer than I was in the Navy, and that was 26 years. When I started the World War II stuff, I would try to find true stories and then write them in such a way that you got the story. But I did not want to step on the toes of any of the people, the crews, the widows, the descendants of people who'd been killed in these things by doing a regular history book. So I fictionalize it, but it's pretty true to what actually happened. And my skill at this is that I've been through all of this. I've done a lot of this. So I can make it sound like, I was there and watching. I wasn't. I was born in December 1941. My father used to say I caused World War II because I was born in December 1941. But that's the way it comes across. And it's effective because it's real. It is real.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, no, it definitely is effective, because when I read the book, needless to say, it made me to go look up the story more, because I had heard about the Franklin, but I'd never really dug into it before I read this book.
Mm-hmm.
There's a site on YouTube called Drachenfeld. Do you guys know it?
Yeah. Drachenfeld. Yeah, Drac.
And I don't know how to pronounce it, but he has a segment on the Franklin, which has some of the most fascinating black and white photography I've seen of this thing. Plus his sort of dry British humor that, this thing did not go as planned. No kidding. It did not go as planned. But the whole story, and particularly of the young naval officer that went back into the galley or the mess decks where 200-300 people had gathered and they couldn't get out, so he led them out.
Yeah.
Having gone, first of all, on a tour to see if he could find a way out.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lieutenant or Lieutenant JG. Now,
that was Lieutenant JG. Was that Donald Gary?
Gary, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Got the Medal of Honor for it, because he not only led them out, he went back to another space and led more people out. And he went back like 3 or 4 times into the inside of the ship, because he was a damage control officer.
Mm-hmm.
He knew the ship. He knew all about the ship. Because in damage control, you have to physically, even on something the size of a carrier, you have to walk and pace every passageway, every compartment, every escape route, every ladder, every hatch. You have to know all that in order to fight a fire when somebody calls and says, the reefer deck's burning. Where's the reefer deck? He knew where the reefer deck was because he'd done all that. And that's one of the main things about damage control. I've been on destroyers. I've not served on a carrier except for a short time in the Indian Ocean. I tried to take a tour of that ship. I forget which one it was. I was a Commodore of a squadron of destroyers. I didn't have much to do, so I said, I'm going to tour this carrier. I was aboard for 3 months. I don't think I saw half of it. Making a constructive effort every day to go somewhere different on this great big aircraft carrier. And going into places like, oh shit, where the hell am I? Getting on a telephone. So it says right here, I'm on the 4th deck, this frame, this compartment, help, and somebody would come get me. And that's what it was like on these great big ships. But this guy, the damage control assistant, had done that. That's how he got these people out. It's just,
wow.
Astonishing.
Yeah. Did you guys have any other questions before I move on to the captain?
Yeah, I have.
Go ahead, Shane. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a quick thought, and it's it's very pertinent. Welcome, Captain. Thanks for being here, and thank you for your sacrifices and writing these books. Fabulous stuff. So I was reading through the real history, through the Naval History and Heritage Command, the damage report for the Franklin, and I was excited to read that us at the Buffalo Naval Park, we are home to the destroyer USS the Sullivans, which during World War II was part of Destroyer Squadron 52.
Right.
And I was reading in the real history that the USS Miller and the USS Hickok, which were both part of Desron 52, were there doing a damage control, and then they were steaming astern of the ship, picking up survivors in the wake of the ship. But I believe in your book, you changed the name of the USS Miller. Now, I know this isn't a technical question, and I hope to learn more about some other things, but I don't remember what you called the destroyer, but it wasn't USS Miller DD 535. Was that do you remember?
Yes. Yes. It is a conscious decision. In all of my books, I try to make sure, like I said, that I don't step on the toes or the memories of the people from the real ships. And I get away with it by saying, it's fiction, But I have hundreds of emails from people who say, my grandfather, my father, my uncle, my older brother, and they would never talk about it. And having read your book, I now understand what they went through. Thank you very much, because I could never find out from them. So I changed names. I changed names of the admirals, the commodores, the captains. The captain of this ship was a problem child. Name was Gary's, and but I didn't use that name in the book, just because I don't want to hear from some grandson saying, you have slandered my father or my grandfather and all that. Yeah, there he is. It reminds me of Goering, just looking at Herman Goering. And he acted like Herman Goering. You know his story? He was an admiral.
He took a demotion so that he could serve on the carrier, correct?
So he could get command of a carrier. Great big guy. Yeah. That doesn't do him credit. Great big burly guy. And when he went through the ship, he'd have a Marine ahead of him and a Marine behind him. And they yell, gangway, gangway, captain coming through. And people had to flatten themselves against the passageways so that this guy could get through. And they thought, well, that's kind of rude. Why don't you say, excuse me or something? Not him.
What in your research for this book, and obviously, when you dig into the past of people like the captain here, and then you decide to write it in a, with a historical fiction approach.
Yeah.
I can definitely understand you're going to get emails, you're going to get letters. Hey, thanks for telling this story. My father never talked about this. Hey, thanks for telling this story. I never really knew what my uncle or great uncle did. I just knew they were on the Franklin, never knew what they went through. But not all of those comments, not all of those letters, not all of those emails can be positive. You had to get some negative criticism too.
Never did.
Never did.
In all the books I've done for World War II, I've gotten some nitpicking. Like you said, this was a hell diver or a hell cat.
Yeah.
I've made those mistakes, but those are mistakes I make in telling the story. I have never received an email saying, you bastard, you made my father, you made this ship look bad and all that. Never.
Boy, never. Shane, how great would that be not to get negative comments, huh?
Well, yeah. I've been doing this for 30 years. And
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
No, mistakes. That's something else. I make mistakes. And they always start out, I love the damn book, but you said X, and X wasn't true until such and such. And, I say Gomenasai, and I'll fix it.
Any other questions, guys, before we move on to the rest of the part of the story?
I've got a quick question, yeah.
Go for it.
So this was... like I was telling the guys earlier, I haven't read a book this fast or been addicted to a book in a very long time, like I was yours. So great job. Now, since you did just recently write this, and the World War II generation is sadly fading, did you have access to any firsthand interviews with Franklin crew, or for the most part, were they gone by the time you decided to write this?
No, but my father was a lieutenant at the Boston Naval Shipyard when Pearl Harbor happened. And he immediately transferred to the USS San Juan, which was a light cruiser with a bunch of 5-inch guns on it. He served on that for a year and a half, came back to Boston, took command of the USS Cogswell, which was a Fletcher-class destroyer. From there, he became a division commander. From there, he became a squadron commander. And from 43 to 46, he was out there. And so as I grew up, he would tell these stories. And I talked to him about the Franklin. And I said, what can you tell me that's not in the literature? And he said, well, let me tell you about the skipper, because I knew him. Well, these guys knew each other. They were all Naval Academy graduates. No OCS, no reservists at the command level. So I got a lot of information and insight about how it worked on a carrier and what was important and what was not important. And what was important was if the admiral said, I want every plane that is flyable on your carrier to launch tomorrow morning because we're going to go hit the kamikaze bases. And that's what happened in this case. And Gary said every plane got it, which is why they ended up with armed and gas planes down on the hangar deck, which they never do, because every damn plane was going to go, and they were launching when this happened. But I have sources like that, or I did. My dad's passed away now, but I've lived as a Navy junior and lived in the presence of an uncle, my father. My older brother was a submariner in the Navy. My younger brother was a destroyer officer in the Navy. So we're a Navy family. We know lots of Navy people. And when we get together, you'd hear these stories. And so I've got that advantage. Research is good. But I can remember somebody saying, this guy Gary was a world-class jerk. That guy,
Yeah. Well, and
he was.
Yeah, and I've even looked up YouTube videos of veterans of the sailors that served aboard the Franklin, and they would tell the story. They would talk about whether it was the putting the fires out or getting the carrier back to New York. They would tell that story, but when it came to the captain, they all pretty much said, yeah, I don't really have anything good to say about him.
Yeah.
or yeah, I don't really have anything to say about the captain. That they wouldn't say anything
Right.
about that, which pretty much speaks volumes.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, they just did not like the guy, and he
didn't like the guy.
treated them
He didn't
terribly.
like them. And I remember he took over a new commissioned ship, which was manned by a bunch of recruits. And so they knew nothing, and he literally would be down on the flight deck, berating them like Simon Legree. How come you don't know this? Well, sir, nobody told me this. I don't care, and just like that. He had, I think I put it in the book, the telephones. He had telephones installed in some of the senior officers' room, and he'd call to see if they were there or if they were out doing their job. And of course, all the department heads figured this out real quick. So if the phone rang while the department head was in his office, he'd point at some sailor, and then he'd leave the room so the sailor wouldn't lie. No, sir, he's not here, sir. Well, where is he? Well, he's out on deck, sir. He's somewhere, I mean, that's crazy.
So that's not a liberty. That's not a liberty you took. That
actually happened.
Really?
Yeah, that actually happened. And he'd rate these guys.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's those small details that you throw into the story that, well, and John said, it was a quick read. It's fascinating. I mean, I read it fast and I'm a slow reader, but it's those small details that I found so fascinating. But I was kind of under the assumption that
Making it up.
these are things you made up to kind of fill in some gaps.
No, they're not. They're not. And some of the things that happened that day were so bizarre. You, as they say, you can't make this stuff up. And the Naval History Division has log accounts, the after action reports, the sailors having to take mops down onto the hangar deck to mop up the carbonized remains. Now, mops on ships are called swabs. And you have a bucket, and you have a rinsing bucket, and you got a bucket with an arm on it to clean the swab off. That's how they picked up the remains of the people on a lot of parts of the ship. And all they could do was pour it over the side. And there were people who had mental problems. We call it PTSD now, but had mental problems for doing that. These were guys whom they knew, with whom they had worked, that they were mopping smears of carbon off the hangar deck, pouring them over the side. No gunfire salute, no flags, no nothing. Because there were so many, and they were all dead, and it smelled bad. When she got into Pearl Harbor, people wouldn't go aboard the ship because it smelled so bad.
Yeah, you had even made a reference to that. After the carrier did pull into Pearl Harbor, there was I believe a JAG officer that you had written into the story that came aboard, and you immediately handed him a jar of Vicks Vapor Rub to put under his nose which I believe.
Well, we carried Vicks on my ship. The corpsman, if there was a compartment somebody had to go into where people had been burned to death or destroyed, which I did not experience, Vicks is very good for that.
Mm-hmm.
Little dab will do you.
Now, after they got the fire out, and of course, this is an image of the deck, the bow, the front third, totally destroyed. You can see the elevators, I believe, were total.
Stern.
I'm sorry?
Stern.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's the stern right there. That's right. Because all crew gathered on the bow because that was the only, yeah. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Right.
But
quarter view.
Yeah, and but both the elevators in this picture, they were both blown out as well from the
that explosion on the hangar bay.
Yeah,
they were blown into the air and came back down into their holes and went down below. And those are flight deck segments. They are elevators, and those are not trivial pieces of metal.
No,
they're both seen in the air. There was one. What was it? I just reread this. There was one major component of the ship back aft that was blown so high into the air they lost sight of it. And then they realized it was going to come back down. And guys were running all over the place, and it did come back down. It went through the flight deck. Something big. I don't remember what it was, but
well. And in many cases, or probably all the cases, after the fire was put out, all the aircraft that were on the deck, this is pretty much all that was left.
Yeah.
Just piles of
metal.
Junk.
With live ordnance. A lot of the bombs on an airplane typically are not armed. Like if you're going to take off and go attack somebody, the bombs are underneath the wings. You have to pull a couple lanyards, and then the pilot has to pull a final lanyard, which opens up something called the spinner up on the front of the bomb, 500-pound bomb, 1,000-pound bomb. The spinner doesn't move until he pulls his final wire, and he doesn't pull that till he drops it. This is a counter to make sure the bomb doesn't go off right underneath the airplane. A lot of the bombs on this thing melted. Many of them burned. A few of them actually went off. But for the most part, they burned. Or they leaked and did not burn. So a pile of wreckage like that could have 1,000 pounds of TNT looking like a shellac on the flight deck. Now you go clean that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you know,
I was reading in the after action or the damage.
yeah,
The damage. Sorry, I'm blanking on the name. That about 60 of the 65 500-pound bombs during this day in March went off on the ship. Can you imagine 60 500-pound bombs exploding or melting or, creating all of that smoke and creating a lot of damage on board? But you just can imagine.
direct hits.
Yeah, they're direct hits, right? Right on the flight deck or
Exactly.
in the
The
hangar
Trucking
deck.
Infill black and white videos show minutes of that.
Yeah.
One after wham, 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 wham. It's unbelievable.
Would you be able to talk about, again, Captain, thank you for being here. Would you be able to talk about the damage control adjustments that they made when they were in the yard in Puget Sound and how that helped the ship stay afloat? Because they made some changes to the damage control systems.
Yes, they did.
Adding,
They didn't. They didn't
8
help.
fire mains.
They didn't help because all of the piping, the spray systems, they had these water curtains between the 3 segments of the hangar bay. But all the piping was out on the bulkheads in the hangar deck. And when the big bang went, when the hangar deck blew up, all that piping was blown off the bulkheads. So now all you had was water leaking out of the water mains and not doing any good at all. Any good at all. On the Forrestal fire, most of that damage was on the flight deck, but some of it got down into the hangar bay. But they had operable fire curtain systems, which they could turn on and turn the atmosphere in the hangar bay into a monsoon. So nothing could really get going and do a Franklin. That was the term of art when the Forrestal fire report came out. We didn't do a Franklin.
Wow.
But on Franklin, when that big explosion took place, all the fancy valves and water curtain systems were obliterated. And that's why it didn't work. This wasn't one airplane that caught fire on the hangar deck, which is what this was designed for. First of all, the bomb went off down there, and then all 12 or 13 of these planes went off simultaneously.
Yeah, that's so catastrophic that no system,
correct,
whether it's brand new or 3 years old, would not be able to survive.
And the guys down in Damage Control Central before they had to evacuate because the smoke got down there. And DC Central, which is the nerve center for doing damage control, was evacuated early on. They couldn't stay there. All the damage control plates, as they're called, which show number 1 engine room, number 2 fire room. There's big 36 by 48 inch drawings on the wall. And you got guys down there with grease pencils. This is broken. This is broken. There's a fire here. And that's how they control the firefighting efforts. They were all wrong. They were all the old ones. Because the shipyard never gave them new ones. Yeah. And I know about that because I had the same thing happen to me.
Yeah, and I think you had even mentioned in the story, in the book, the 2 ensigns that were tasked with trying to tackle and track these lines. They were,
sweet and sour, right?
Yeah, sweet and sour. Yeah, ensign sweet and ensign sour.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So when they were asked, it's like, so how much is accurate and how much? And they said, I don't know, 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
the chief engineer would crap his pants. 50-50. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's what it looks like to us. Oh my God.
But I love that interaction, when they were talking to the officer. I don't remember if it was Gary or but they still said your work has been invaluable. Continue to do it. So you're not as a motivational thing. You're
Yes.
still keeping them positive and keeping the experience of reporting, even if it's 50-50, that they're not going to get slapped across the wrist or
No,
you know,
because they're telling
that you keep
Gary's
remaining-
would have. Now Gary's would have
Yeah.
slapped him across the face, but in naval leadership, Gary's would have been called by people who have had command a screamer.
Mhm.
Gary's was a screamer. You got a prince or you got a screamer. A prince is the guy that you'll follow into hell. And I've had a couple skippers like that. God, I loved them. I'd do anything for them because they never, ever reacted that way. Even when I'd screwed up, say, okay, Pete, what do you think you did wrong? Well, sir, you know, and they say, okay, here's where you went wrong. I understand how this happened because this was so and this was so. Now, what you got to do is relearn X and Y and never do that again. Yes, sir. Never again. Yes, sir. Absolutely. 3 bags full. But you wanted to get it right the next time, as opposed to some guy saying, you dumb ass. Yeah, yap. It doesn't work. The leadership doesn't work that way. It's got to be positive. It's got to be you and me. We're going to fix this. And I'm sorry you got embarrassed by your own error, but I understand it. You're going to experience. I've been there before. I've done this myself, like that. And then the guy will do his utmost to do it better the next time.
Mhm.
Now, as bad as Captain Garris was, you had exceptional guys like we talked about, Lieutenant J.G. Donald Gary, but then you also had this guy,
The chaplain.
Father Joe O'Callaghan, who you make a point of mentioning in your book that he just seemed to be everywhere.
He was
If it wasn't
extraordinary.
Yeah, if it wasn't taking on, leading groups to take on fires, he was also caring for wounded and giving those without hope, last rites. So this guy was everywhere. And
Is this the actual photo of him?
Yes.
yeah, that's him. And
That's
as well as I think this is also him possibly performing a service after,
Wow.
as
Who O'Callaghan was, he was the ship's chaplain. Now the carrier had a Catholic, a Protestant, and a Jewish chaplain because there were 3,000 people on board.
Okay.
But everybody knew that the chaplain, the go-to guy, was O'Callaghan. He had an extraordinary background, very accomplished, and so it was no surprise that he did all these things during the emergency. Nobody was surprised to see O'Callaghan at the head of a fire hose. Nobody, because that's the kind of guy he was. They all knew him. They loved him. They went to him, whether you were Jewish or Protestant or not. If you could catch Father Joe, you talked to him and got what you needed from him. He was famous aboard the ship long before this happened.
And he was eventually, after all this, I believe he was one of the Medal of Honor winners, correct?
They had to force him into it. He said when he was nominated, I'm a chaplain. Medals of Honor go to combatant fighters, to line officers, to people who did X and Y and who were responsible for the air group and for the ship. And the president himself said, hey, I've heard about you from everybody on the Franklin. You will accept this award. Well, let's downgrade it a little bit because it's just not right that a chaplain gets the Medal of Honor. And they all just laughed at him and said, stand tall.
Mm-hmm.
That actually happened. He was that kind of guy.
So they basically gave him an order and say, hey,
yes,
here's your medal.
Here's your medal. Here's the medal.
Now, after the fire's put out, obviously it goes to Pearl Harbor, and then from then on, it goes through the Panama Canal to get back to New York. And
oh my God.
Yeah.
Where, something a ship like this damaged to this extent, you would almost expect it to, just be scrapped in place. But in your book, Trial by Fire, and by the way, this guy that we're listening to is P.T. Duderman. He's the one that wrote Trial by Fire. That's why we're having him on tonight. And we're glad to have you here. In your book, you write about the fact that they actually wanted to kind of stick it to the Japanese to get the ship back to New York, to get it essentially rebuilt and back to sea. Is that accurate?
Yes, it was. I mean, it made no sense to repair this ship. The damage was so extensive, and the war, everybody knew the war was coming to a close, except there was a plan for an invasion. And the invasion was going to be an Olympic effort to go into Japan and finally defeat the Japanese. None of these people had any knowledge of the atomic bomb. And so the war was expected to continue into 1946 by everybody out there in the Pacific. So it was easier to repair Franklin, but there was an element of, we want the Franklin to go back out there and for the Japanese to see her. Having seen her essentially immolation, they wanted to see that America could take a ship like that, fix it, bring it back out there. Oh, excuse me. I take pills and they go off. But see, they knew the Japanese hunted this ship for a couple days trying to find her to finish her off. And goddamn it, here she is again. She's back, launching airplanes. Look at that. How can we possibly win against a nation that can do that to a ship that was so mortally wounded? Bring her back out, all the way back, because that's what they plan to do. Bring her all the way back out to the Pacific and participate in the invasion. So the Japs got to see her.
kind of like a similar approach to, wasn't it the Yorktown that they sent back and then turned it around? Nimitz wanted it back out in like 3 days.
Yes.
Yeah, I forget exactly. Was that?
Well, that was pure necessity.
That was necessity.
You know what? Good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, because there were only like 3 or 4 carriers available, so they had to get it out.
Really, and Yorktown had been damaged, and he said, "Look, Band-Aid how you can, but I need you up here because we're going to surprise these guys." And boy, did they. But the Japanese carriers at Midway were not sunk by naval aviation. They were all for Akagi, Hiryu, Soryu, and Kaga. They were all for set ablaze, just like Franklin was. They were in no danger of sinking, but they were wrecked. The planes couldn't land on them. I mean, they were on flame from one side or the other. It was the Japanese who actually ordered them sunk. People think that, they went down because of the bombings. They did not. They did not. They were all afloat, and the Jap destroyers were sent in with torpedoes to put them underwater because they didn't want to leave them there for the Americans to find. Same deal as Franklin. Franklin was never in any danger of sinking, but she was wrecked.
Well, PT, I heard your alarm go off. You got to go take your pills, and we've had you on for an hour.
Hey, I'm going to be 82 this year. Pills are
good for you.
Well, I mean, we definitely appreciate you not only coming on, but even kind of wading your way through the technical aspects to even join us tonight. So I can't thank you enough. And thanks for trading emails with me to, get you scheduled to come on and talk about Trial by Fire. It's been great having you here.
Yeah.
Well,
thanks so much, Captain.
I'm addicted to YouTube. And in fact, when I'm supposed to be writing, I'm typically on YouTube saying, look at this. God, I never knew that. But I'm glad to get your channel, and I've subscribed to it, actually.
I appreciate that.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is neat. So anytime.
Well, let me let me give you a couple of mentions here. First of all, we've been talking about PT's book, Trial by Fire. Again, totally focused on the bombing of the carrier USS Franklin in 1945. It's a fantastic book. I read it a while ago and then recommended that we work that into tonight's episode about damage control. So had Shane, John, Connor read the book. I actually then got the audio book from Amazon and listened to it all over again, and it was great. So in the link of the description for this video, if you are interested in Trial by Fire by P.T. Duderman, check out the description of the video, and you should find the link to the book there. Also, you can check out PT at his website, www.ptduderman.com. You see it there with 2 N's. Connor, thanks for bringing that up. ptduderman with 2 N's.com. Check out his website because he, I think it was last year, wrote and published this book, The Last Paladin, which is, again, fascinating. Yeah, it was right around a year ago, right, PT, that you published this, about a destroyer escort during World War II, based on a true story. And I don't want to give the story away because it's fantastic, but I really enjoyed it. And so if you enjoyed having PT on here tonight and want to check out some other books, check out The Last Paladin that came out about a year ago. And what's this other book that you've got coming out next?
The next one is about Iwo Jima. And it's the story of a naval officer on a battleship that was offshore Iwo Jima. And in the first 5 days, things got so bad that the Marines needed a guy who was familiar with spotting for naval gunfire support. Marines have guys who are trained to call a battleship or a cruiser and say, okay, I'm in deep trouble. Here are my coordinates. This is where the bad guy is. Could you please place 9 16-inch or 14-inch rounds on his head? And now would be nice. And this guy goes ashore, and you get to experience what it was like on Iwo Jima for the first 6 weeks, which is all supposed to be all done in 1 week. And the research was amazing. I thought I knew all about it, and I did not. And the book will put you right there. And it's just, it is unbelievable, but I hopefully make it believable.
What's the book called, and when does it come out?
It's called Iwo 26 Charlie. Any naval gunfire support spotter who is ashore, Marine or Army, is given the call sign 26 Charlie. Now it might be Mayflower 26 Charlie, Chicago 26 Charlie, but it always has 26 Charlie in it. As part, you immediately know that's a spotter. That's a guy in the weeds with binoculars staring at an entire division of Japanese or Germans or whatever the hell coming right at him, and he needs help from some offshore ship. And he'll call the ship and he'll say, in this case, Nevada, the battleship Nevada, this is Anchorage 26 Charlie, lay it on me. Yeah, and there's a code called the talk. It's not a security code, it's a procedural code. So he'll call up and he'll say, target, bearing, range, composition, many. You can tell from the tone in the guy's voice that he's in dire straits. And then he'll call for fire, and the ship will shoot a couple shells, and the guy will say, no. Come left 1,000. Come up 50 feet. Drop 500 yards. Try it again. Bang. All right, close. And then he'll give it the same coordinates again until the ship rounds are landing right on the problem. And then he'll say, it's kind of funny, he'll say, go on. And here it comes. Give me 10 rounds of 14-inch, go on. This is all explained in the book, and it's a great story.
Fabulous.
So it's called Ewo 26 Charlie, and when should we be expecting it?
November of this year.
November. Got it.
Right.
Before we let Pete go and take his pills, guys, did you have any last questions for him before we Pete, before we kick you off and talk behind your back?
Oh, that's you said come up here and bring the pills.
Connor, do you have a question?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to thank you for coming tonight. And I'm really looking forward to reading more of your books because and I showed these guys before the call. I have like a whole lineup of books I need to finish, but it's about to become more. But basically, one thing I'd ask is for anyone who's interested in writing a historical book like this, or not like a historical fiction type book, would there be any advice you would recommend to these people? Like anything that you've learned, like starting from your first book up to where you are now?
Well, I started in 1992, and I've gotten a lot of questions about people who have a story and they want to write a book, but they're put off by the fact that in some cases I can't type, or the computer scares me a little bit, or what's the format? And the fundamental question that would-be authors have is, who am I to think that I can write a book? It's a question of confidence, because a lot of folks say, I got this great story, but I can't write a book. And what I tell them is, pretend you're in a bar with a bunch of your buddies. You're having drinks and sitting at the bar, and you're telling lies and sea stories and whatever. And you tell your guys, your friends, you say, hey, I got this story. And you're not going to believe this, but I've got this story. And you tell them the story. You don't have to write it. There's no grammar involved. There's no punctuation. There's no format. You just tell the story and have in your pocket a voice-activated tape recorder. And you pretend that you're sitting at the bar telling your buddies, and when you tell stories like that, you put voices in there. You change the voices, and I said this, and this guy, blah, blah, blah. Put all that in it. Put all that in it. Record it. Then go down to the courthouse and ask for the room where all the court recorders are. Hand one of them the tape recorder and say, I'll pay you $1 a page to put this down in a manuscript. They'll do it faithfully. They'll do it faithfully. That the witness said vehemently. The witness got they do that for a living. And now what you have is called a manuscript.
So basically what you're doing is, for those people that are trying to make excuses, well, I can't type.
Yeah.
Or, you're taking away the opportunity for them to make an excuse. So just talking to a recorder and then give it to a court reporter, stenographer or whatever.
Then you got a manuscript, and they'll do a double space, triple space, they'll do it any format you want. Now, the second part, if you want to get it published, is you must find an agent. Publishers used to have this thing called over the transom. Over the transom meant you threw the manuscript over the front door of the publishing house into what was called the slush pile. The slush pile. The junior editor who had pissed off the senior editor got to go through the slush pile and see if there were any jewels in there whatsoever. And once in a while they'd find one. That's all gone. You must have an agent to get a book in front of a publisher. There's a book for that. I would say there's an app for that, but there's a book for that. It's called Guide to Literary Agents in North America. It comes out every year. It's in the library, and it describes all the agents and what kind of stuff they handle. Got a children's book, got a horror story, got vampires, got naval history. What do you got? You go get this guy, and If you can convince him that what you've got is worthwhile, he'll convince a publisher to take it on. That's how you can publish.
What about self-publishing on Amazon? I'm sorry, I know you probably had to go take your Lipitor.
Jesus.
So
I'm right here, and
yeah.
I've got just exactly what I need to take it.
Okay. So, I mean, so then you stumble across, you talk about agents and everything, and Connor asked this question. It's like, well, if he has a friend that wants to write a book and everything like that, but what about, I hear a lot about self-publishing through something like Amazon. What's your opinion on that? I mean, if you've got somebody that has a story, and I'm sure this happens to you all the time, or like Connor mentioned, if somebody wants to do it, isn't self-publishing an option for those folks?
Sure, self-publishing is an option. But if you want to hit the New York publishing scene, if you want to have an entire floor of editors looking at your stuff, if you want to have a publicity department, if you want to have an editor who'll say, hey, this is great, but you've got the wrong voice, or this is great, but God, man, you keep saying the word again, again, and again, and again, and again. Like that. The pros. This is not necessarily the big time, but the professionals. You need an agent, and the agent will tell you this is not ready for prime time. But he'll also tell you, he or she, that here's how to fix it. It's invaluable. It's invaluable. I started publishing. I was a retired naval officer. I had a great story. And I was in London at the time, and I'd written the story, and I had a friend who had an agent. He gave it to the agent. The agent came back and said, you got 3 great books here. It was an 850-page manuscript. I thought, more is better. And he said, no. Try something shorter. You can write. You have the knowledge, but this is ridiculous. I didn't know it was ridiculous. It was great. It was a tome. I couldn't carry it. But that's how you get in. The agents are the filter. If you can't convince an agent to take the work, it's not worth publishing. Okay. Self or otherwise.
Wade, one of the viewers tonight asked if he's not familiar with your book. So if he wanted to start reading your collection of books, give us a recommendation. Where do they start?
Pacific Glory. Yep. It won the National Best Military Fiction Award called the Boyd Award, and it's a really good human story about war. I'd say start with that one, and then move forward for the World War II stuff. There's a dozen of them. Yeah, go to the website. Each book is described on the website.
Let's see.
There you go.
Yeah. So, and I think the one that I started with was actually Ghosts of Bungo Sweeto. I think that was the first book I had read.
Right. The World War II, the thrillers was me trying to get used to professional writing. I had no problem with the writing, but I couldn't figure out where the market was. Then I did Pacific Glory, and there was the market, right there. That one did very well, won awards, and it's basically a story of Leyte Gulf. But after that, I went with the Navy stuff. Write about what you know.
Yeah. Well, and it definitely shows in the books that, I've read of yours. The Hooligans, if you like PT boats, I enjoyed that a lot. That was fantastic. So, we might need to have you on again soon. Wade, thanks for that question. Any last questions for PT before we kick him off?
No, just thank you so much for being here.
Hey, my pleasure. It was fun.
Yeah, it was great to have you on here. And one last mention for those of you, if you enjoyed having PT on with us, check out his website, PT Duderman with 2 N's, ptduderman.com, and check out all his books. PT, thanks for joining us tonight. Definitely appreciate the time you gave us, which was a heck of a lot longer than I thought it would be. So it was fascinating.
Okay, well, that's great. And I have subscribed, and I will visit often.
Fantastic. All right, we're gonna kick you off and talk behind your back.
Okay.
All right. You have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.
Uh,
That was great.
yeah, what'd you think?
That was a lot of fun.
It was a lot
Oh,
of
so
fun.
we literally are talking behind his back. Okay.
Well, we haven't ended the broadcast yet.
Oh, that's true.
We still need to talk about what you guys are doing.
Sometimes you just need to just sit back and just let someone talk. And tonight was that kind of night. Just I could listen to him talk for hours.
That's a good call,
You know,
Frank.
I didn't know what to think. I've been a fan of his books. I've read a lot of his books, and of course, we're talking about this tonight. But then, of course, there's that old adage: you never want to meet. What is it? You never want to meet the. Yeah. There you go. And even though we had challenges, getting him on connected tonight, I was glad that he was there. I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I could have listened to him talk all night tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So don't forget, for those of you that are interested in his writing, and for those of you that have been interested in what John Epp has had to say about the Slater, don't forget PT's book. Let's see if I can pull it up here. So the one that came out a year ago, The Last Paladin, which is a really, just in the same way he told the story of the Franklin and the bombing. Right, what's that?
I'm looking it up right now.
Oh, yeah. So The Last Paladin, came out about a year ago, and it's all about a destroyer escort. Before tonight's broadcast, I actually mentioned it to John. The name of the destroyer escort is fictional, but John immediately knew the story that P.T. Duderman was basing it on. So if you're looking for another book to read, I highly recommend it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. All right. So with that said, now we get to move on to, because we're not done yet. Now we get to move on to see what's going on with the Buffalo Naval Park, the USS Slater, and the Alexander Henry. Who wants to start? Shane, you want to kick it off? What's going on with the Buffalo Naval Park?
Yeah, sure. Well, we are just kind of in our season now. There's we're pretty active. There's a lot going on. I'm doing these add-on tours every other Thursday and Friday, gun tours and weapons control tours for the guided missile systems. So those are going really well. There's a lot of good news, and I'll be pretty vague, but there's some good news about us getting another Talos missile from South Bend, Indiana, and we are going to make a big splash about that. So we're securing funding now, and we'll place it on board the Little Rock where it belongs. And we'll be able to fill out our wing and fin room a little bit as well. So the cat's not out of the bag yet, but you'll see it as when we actually put the boots on the ground, get the missile and the booster itself. And that's in South Bend, Indiana. Then also looking at Groton, Connecticut. There's some, we're making some headway with what we believe is the Croker periscope. That have I said that before? I can't remember.
I don't remember if you said on stream or off stream. To be honest, we talked for like 2 hours after last show.
You're right about that. Yeah.
Yes.
For those of you that aren't aware, after we sign off at night, then we end up talking for like another half hour, 45 minutes. And I think Connor's right. You had mentioned, wait, am I even allowed to say it?
What?
About the periscope? It's
well,
like behind
well,
all right. Sorry.
the Croker periscope we have located. They cut it off in about 1986 or 87, and they just placed it somewhere. And so there's been revived talk about going to get it. I've been looking at GIS maps, who actually owns that particular parcel along the Thames River, and looking again for some funding sources to potentially go get the 40-foot. And it's been verified. The people that I've talked to have said, yes, we were there when they cut the periscope off and laid it on the ground. So, but yeah, that's as far as I'll go. But so we got exciting things in Connecticut, exciting things in Indiana. And so I'm kind of just managing and getting those projects off the ground and things like that. So for my own end, it's tours and these 2 large projects. But we are also doing movies on the Fantail now called Fantail Flicks.
Mhm.
So we have, I think we're doing 7 movies. So it's the first year. We get about 15 or 20 people per movie. And it's free, so that's pretty nice.
Frank says, talk about Shane's July 16th video.
Oh, geez.
What's that?
Okay, we uploaded. Okay, so very quickly, 716 is Buffalo's area code. So, but it's also it's like a 36-hour GoFundMe kind of thing for about 600 community organizations around Buffalo, sponsored by the Buffalo Bills Foundation and the Buffalo Sabres Foundation. So they opened up the Bills Stadium and they opened up the Sabres Arena this year for us to do filming for the 716, and it starts at 7:16 in the morning on July 16th, and then runs for 36 hours and ends at 7:16 at night. And so it's kind of a drive where then the foundation matches certain monies if someone gives to a community organization. As I said, it's not just us. There's about 600 community organizations that are taking advantage of this. But we did a promotional video on YouTube. And that was uploaded today. It's pretty funny. It's me being my normal charming and kind of off the chart self. So check that out, everybody. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it.
Where would people go to learn more about that? Would they go to buffalonavalpark.org?
Yeah, I think there's a just give716.org. Okay. I think. I'm sorry, I should know that, but I think it's give716 that you probably just look it up on DuckDuckGo or Google or something. And but thank you. Yeah, it's kind of a fun video because we can go into the locker rooms of the sports teams and things like that.
So Shane Stevenson, curator at the Buffalo Naval Park. To learn more about the Buffalo Naval Park, definitely check out their website, www.buffalonavalpark.org. But also search for the YouTube channel. It's simple. Just go on the search bar and type in Buffalo Naval Park, and their content will come up. The videos, Shane started to post some YouTube shorts, which I think are pretty interesting. So definitely check them out. Like I said, check them out on YouTube and search for Buffalo Naval Park. Moving on to John Epp, USS Slater. What do you guys got coming up?
So since our last broadcast, we had the final.
That was like a pretty big sigh. It's like, is it because you're so busy over there, or is it because, probably because you're busy?
Oh, I make myself busy. I got a billion little projects going on. Mm-hmm. The couple days after our last broadcast, we had Dust's final reunion. So that was a big shebang. I had a very, very large turnout for that. It was a lot of fun. Got to meet some World War II DE vets, including one who was on the Chatelaine, and he helped capture U-505. So we gave a speech at our banquet. He was firing his depth charges at U-505, and he ran out of depth charges.
No kidding.
All he could do was watch. And apparently he threw his depth charge, the wrench you set the depth, he threw it at U-505 because he was frustrated.
Wow.
What else do we got going on? Not a whole lot. We've been busy with tours. August, the biggest thing we have going on in August is August 4th. Coast Guard birthday. We'll have a little celebration at the museum. And then September, of course, is Hensa, which we're very much looking forward to.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, John, I have a question for you.
Sure.
When you say we have one big event in the month of August, is that kind of relatively common for you? I mean, do you have how many events do you have, if there is any? How many events do you have a week?
When I say a big event, I mean 50 people. We
No, I
don't
know,
do
but
events.
no, I'm understanding that. But like, you have one event a month that you guys do on board, or like, do
No,
you have?
it's special dates. So the first one of the year that we always do is DE Day. So it's in June. It's the National Destroyer Escort Day. We're the only one who celebrates it now. July, we don't really have anything. August, we celebrate Coast Guard Day. September, I don't think we usually have anything in September that I recall off the top of the head, except this year we do.
Yeah.
October's busy for us. November.
What about your
just
overnights? You're still doing overnights, right?
Yeah, we don't do those in the summertime though. It's just too hot. So we stop in
okay.
early June. We pick it up late August, early September.
Okay.
So, like, do you have events that say are not sponsored by you guys, but that other groups around Albany or the Tri-City or whatever you say, do you have people renting, like, I mean, it seems as though for the Buffalo Naval Park, we have 7 events a week from organizations that want to do something. And I don't think I'm lying. I mean, we have
No, I believe
groups that
I've
wanna
seen your
set up
guys'
tables,
yeah.
that do you get other organizations coming to you and say, we want to do an event here at the Slater, and then you say, oh, okay, we're going to charge you this much money and whatever?
Nope. The biggest reason, look at my picture right now. It's a small ship. The parking lot is very tiny as well. So
Gotcha.
yeah,
I'm just wondering how you guys the differences, I guess. Yeah.
So a major issue is, the ship could accommodate 220 some odd guys during the war, but the largest interior space inside the ship, you can accommodate 50, 75 people, the mess deck.
Yeah.
So it's hard to really have anyone do events. We're also terrified of theft. We're terrified of someone getting hurt because nothing is behind plexiglass or anything. Everything is wide open because we want the ship to be 1945, almost like the crew is tied up in Brooklyn and they're all left for Liberty for the weekend. That's how we like the ship to look. So, so we are, because of that, we're 100% self-sufficient on ticket sales and gift shop sales and donations. So we can't really.
But you have a relatively very low overhead.
Average cost estimate is roughly $1,000 a day operating expenses. That's just a rough estimate. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you have 4 paid staff people. Is that right?
3 full-time, 1 part-time, and then we pay our interns.
All right.
We have 4 or 5 or 6 interns usually every year.
Wow. Just for you specifically?
No, they're our tour guides. They supplement our tour guides.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So
paid.
We have volunteers that do maintenance and restoration. We have volunteers that do tours.
Sure.
But we got to rely on the college kids to open the ship every morning, keep it clean, run the register, and help with tours.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay. See, we have a lot more overhead. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, you have 3 ships, one of which is 3 times the size of the Slater.
Yeah. No, I was curious because I always like to go to the calendars of other museum ships and.
So Shanna. Shanna mentions every once in a while. She's like, this entire museum is run by a group of introverts. I don't like talking to people unless I'm talking about history. I can't stand small talk. Oh my gosh, I hate it.
Well, you're young yet. You're young. You're young yet. You'll grow out of that, I think.
Tim is very much an introvert as well. So,
if you could believe it or not, I'm an introvert as well. But my job has forced me to be extroverted, and then I come home and I absolutely collapse and don't need to talk to anyone for about 17 hours before I have to start talking to people again. But no, those are things that you can grow out of. I was an introvert, and then over time you just have to, you don't have to, but you develop skills that you didn't have when you were younger. So
I don't know if I would agree with the word introvert. I mean, I would say, you definitely enjoy your alone time.
Well,
but
do we want to go? Good thing there's 28 people watching right now. Introversion, extroversion is where do you get your energy from? Is like the technical definition. So it's not like I'm quiet or I like to talk. It's if I have a rough day, what do I do to recharge myself?
Yeah.
Oh, I
And
see.
introverts will retreat, play music, read a book. Extroverts will get on the phone and say, "Oh, I need a drink. Let's go out and have a drink."
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm a big talker. I'm a big quiet person. It's where you go to recharge your batteries. And do you retreat into yourself, or do you, go outside of yourself looking for help?
Oh, I just remembered something.
What?
Just came to us last week. For a while, we kind of thought our namesake Frank Slater had been in the Civilian Conservation Corps prior to the war. We have a photograph of him in full khaki uniform, but he wasn't an officer, so he's not an enlisted guy. It's uniform. So we figured it was maybe the CCC.
The what?
The Civilian Conservation Corps.
Oh.
During the Great Depression, it was one of the programs they put together. Basically, people would go around the country and do conservation things, plant trees, things like that. But the National Archives has all the CCC records, and you can place a request in and see if there's a record. So I put a records request in a few months back and for Frank Slater, and they just emailed me last week and said, yeah, we got a file.
Nice.
They sent us an 11-page file, and turns out he had joined the CCC. Went in, Alabama. He worked in Oregon, worked in California, became qualified in radio operation, and then war broke out, and he went off to war.
That is a great find.
So it's nice. We got to send that to the family. Most of the family didn't know that. We didn't know that. So he's still learning stuff.
Yeah.
Well, wait a second. Why was the Slater named after Frank Slater?
He joined the Navy in February of 42.
Yeah.
He was a seaman second class. He was assigned to a 20 millimeter on the San Francisco heavy cruiser, and he shot down a Japanese torpedo bomber and probably killed the pilot, but the plane was already so close that it crashed right into his station and killed 11 people. No one tried abandoning their station. They kept firing right till the end. Silver Star. They named that ship after him.
Okay.
I didn't know that. All right. Anything? Okay. So you had that big news. Anything else coming up that you want people to be aware of?
If anyone wants to volunteer for a work week, that's coming up in October, first week of October. You can live on the ship for a couple days, entire week, and we'll give you a project, give you a paintbrush. And where is that? USSSlater.org? Yeah, you can contact us through Facebook Messenger. You can contact our director, Tim. His email is just tim@USSSlater.org. He handles all that.
Got it. So John Epp, curator at the USS Slater in Albany, New York. Of course, we just mentioned their website, USSSlater.org. Definitely check it out. But also, what? Frank in chat, he came for a spring work week. Frank, you coming for the fall? That Frank was okay.
Yeah, Frank Bodenchest.
Yeah. See if he shows up in the fall. But in the meantime, the Slater's YouTube channel, definitely get on YouTube, search bar, type in USS Slater. It'll come right up. Check out their YouTube content. I always find it interesting. The same with the Buffalo Naval Park. And yeah, so that was John Epp, USS Slater. And now we're going to go on to Connor Kilgore at the Alexander Henry Icebreaker Museum, Thunder Bay, Ontario. What do you guys got going on?
You never 100% get it right. Should I make my own introduction?
Wow, what's going on? Let's lay into Ken. Ken, come on. We've had Connor on for 3 or 4 times now, and you can't get it right.
Well, what did I get wrong? Is it not in Thunder Bay?
Yes, it is. But just the way you say it, it's like the Alexander Henry Icebreaker Museum. Anyway, never mind. It's the Transportation Museum of Thunder Bay. That's what it's called.
Oh, you talk about the actual name. Yeah.
Yeah, the museum.
www.tmtb.ca.
Yes.
Thunder Bay Transportation.
No,
Yeah.
Transportation
Museum
Museum of Thunder Bay.
Yeah, the Henrys are centerpiece. So what's going on the Henry? Well, in the next 3 days now, wow, it's coming up on us quick, is Coast Guard Day. Here at the Alexander Henry, we celebrate once in July. It's generally in the weekend, either right before or right after the Henry's launch day, which was July 18th. So this year it's the year before, or a weekend before. We are celebrating the Canadian Coast Guard. But also this year, we're also going to be celebrating the Royal Canadian Navy Reserve, which is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. So we're going to be holding a joint celebration for them. It'll be open to the public. John, what you said about being terrified of free roam tours, I know that fear quite well, because we don't have the educational staff to do guided tours for this event. So we're going to have to do that. So I'm actually spending the next 2 days safing the ship, for lack of a better word, and prepping it for the event. But it should be good. It should be really good. We are actually going to have another Coast Guard ship in attendance. The CCGS Samuel Risley will be coming up. She is the ship that immediately replaced the Henry in the fleet. I'm sure you can find a picture of her. But yeah, so she'll be coming up for the event, and she will also be doing an open house as well. So people who come up will be able to see what a 1950s era Coast Guard icebreaker was like, and what a 1980s through to modern Coast Guard icebreaker is like. So we're looking forward to it. It's not a common event here in Canada to have a celebration for the Coast Guard, but we're excited to do it. The official Coast Guard celebration, I believe, is in November, to give you an idea. So you can't really do much with Canadian winters in November. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this in the first place. So this will be our second year, and we're looking forward to it. Aside from that, our other event of the season is our Haunted Harbor. The Henry does become a ghost ship in October. And
no way. That sounds cool.
Yeah, so like the windows go red, and that one center window there, that goes green. So it gets all spooky. They're going to be holding that event. This will be our second year. We'll be partnering with the nonprofit Our Kids Count for that. And we're looking forward to holding this event this year. And it's going to be different compared to last year. So people who potentially want to come back, it's not the same event from last year. And then really the only other big thing going on is the fact that we're open. We're at the height of summer now, and we're seeing that. We're seeing a considerable uptake compared to when we opened in May. Went from about 3 tours a day to now we're shooting through the roof, where all our tour guides are probably doing 4 or more. And it's going quite well. And what's really nice for us to see now is the Americans are back.
Is that a good thing?
Yes, it is. It is. I'd say they make up about half of our visitors right now. So, and just this week, just in this last 7-day period, I've had Florida, I've had Texas, I've had California, I've had Connecticut, lots of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, which are like the 3 closest states to us. I've had a couple New Yorkers. Let's see, have I had any? I haven't had anyone from Maine yet. Yeah, pretty much all the big states have shown up now, and it's nice to see. It's really nice to see. Actually, we did get a person from Buffalo, New York. So that was pretty cool.
Nice.
And they knew about the Buffalo Naval Park and all that. And we also had a guy who had actually, no, we're gonna lie, had just been on the dry dock tour of the Texas.
Oh wow.
And then it come to Thunder Bay for work reasons, and now he was on our tour. So
did he know about us prior? Did he come to your site because the guy who was on the Texas,
the guy from Buffalo,
your site, or the guy from Buffalo?
He had been to your museum before, And when he saw there was a museum ship in Thunder Bay, he went, "Oh, I'm gonna take my opportunity. I'm gonna go down and see it." So that was good.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, it is.
Let's
That's
see.
more or less how it is.
Well,
what's the best
okay.
way of getting to Thunder Bay? Is it just driving? Or?
Well, flying or driving. Realistically, there's no water transport here. Not anymore. Yeah, don't get me started. I could go on a whole essay about how there used to be passenger ships they used to come.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I know. But yeah, driving is generally how most of them get here. Because Canada, if you look at Canada's roadway system, it all converges on us at one point. So basically, if you're traveling across Canada, you end up coming through our town. So that is one advantage we have, is we get people from all over the U.S. We get all people from all over Canada, and we're actually seeing a lot of people from overseas. We've had Germans, although that might be more due to the cruise ships. We've had Belgians. We had some Scots relatively recently. Get in the Jetta and ride.
That was for me.
Shane's got a Jetta.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
And but no, it's seeing good, and I'm hoping that you guys are getting similar number, like it's similar increase now that you're in the height of the season, because one thing I absolutely love is when you're doing this and you're introducing the history of this region, because again, my ship might be about the ship, but there's a whole section, like about half of the upper deck is about other parts of our history, because we don't have a building yet. Is you get to teach people about the richness of our region, and just the fascinating things that have gone on here, and how we get to educate people. And that's one of the reasons why I even do this. Like, I absolutely love it. But other than that, let's see. More or less, that's about it. There's a couple displays we're going to be working on soon, a couple new displays, and it should be exciting to see what happens in the following year. Because, last thing, we are actually in the process of acquiring the paint to finish up the red on the ship.
Yeah, you talked about that prior.
Yeah, I talked about last week. We're at that point now. We're going to start the stern, which wasn't painted when we got the ship. We're going to go around the port side and then come back around the bow, and that's our plan for this year.
Make sure you take videos of that. I'm sure that's going to be an adventure.
It's going to be vlog, 100%.
Oh, look at Gaming for Dummies.
What's
Currently
that?
at USS Alabama, staying the night. I wonder if he's staying the Gaming for Dummies. Yeah, I wonder if they're on the battleship, staying over on the battleship. Thanks for watching.
Definitely something. Glad
that is one of my favorite. That is one of my favorite ships. Is the Alabama. I love it.
The other thing I want to mention about Connor Kilgore, of course, he's working behind the scenes, handling comments, and he's with the Alexander Henry, the Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker. But he's also one of the administrators for the Museum Ships Facebook group. So if you have not checked out the Museum Ships Facebook group, there's, I don't know, 10, 20 posts a day on there at least, right, Connor?
Yeah, at least.
And a lot of, current event stuff with, museum ships, as well as a lot of history as well. So that's how I came across Connor. So definitely check out the Museum Ships Facebook group if you haven't had a chance already. And of course, as Connor was spelling it out for you, make sure I get this right, the Alexander Henry Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker on display in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Yeah. How'd that sound?
That sounds better.
To learn more, check out the website, www.tmtb.ca. Sound good?
Yep. Or check out our Facebook page, the Transportation Museum of Thunder Bay on Facebook.
I will make a note of that for the future. Facebook, the Transportation Museum of Thunder Bay. Do a search for that on Facebook. But before we close things out, I always tell people, when it comes to the Buffalo Naval Park, the USS Slater, and their YouTube channels, maybe the Alexander Henry will start doing a YouTube channel as well. One of the best ways and one of the simplest ways is to simply check out their content and subscribe. If you have enjoyed their videos, but you haven't clicked subscribe, it's one of the simplest, yes, yet most effective ways to throw your support behind what these guys do. So check out their videos, hit the likes, all of that stuff. It goes to building their YouTube channel. And once they reach a certain point, actually, both channels are over 1,000 subscribers. So they're starting to earn money. And it's another way to generate revenue for those museum ships. So I always want to mention that. If you guys haven't done it already, hit subscribe, please.
We are going to have to talk to Tim and Parks from the USS Kidd. Have you been watching that series of videos that they do where they splash water on everybody?
Yeah.
Have you been seeing that? What's going on? I want to get to the bottom. I can't remember.
They've been doing that since they started.
Really? I've only seen it really recently.
I actually haven't seen it at all. How did I miss this?
Oh,
Well,
yeah. Basically, they like the whoever's talking in that episode or in their video, he gets splashed with water at least twice during the video.
They're splashing them all over the place. They're throwing like newspapers at them. So they're telling the story like, oh yeah, the ship was out in the ocean and then it went to pick up, and then all of a sudden they get a face full of water and they're dripping wet, but then they just continue on with the story. So I know there's a series that it's called. I can't remember what it's called. Shoot. But yeah, I want to find out what gave them that idea. Not that we would mimic it, I guess. But
yeah, I was going to say that doesn't necessarily sound like your style. But hey, if it works for Tim and Parks,
people love it. It seems so. Yeah.
Really? I'll have to search for it. I haven't seen it. Let's see. John, Shane, anything else you guys want to mention before we close it out?
Thanks everyone for watching this.
Yeah, I definitely want to thank
everyone. I do want to say something very quickly. We don't have to. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
But I was not expecting that answer from Captain about.
Duderman.
Yeah, thank you, Duderman. Thank you. I was not expecting his answer about that the upgrades that they did to the DC, in Puget Sound, they were that they were not helpful because reading through the damage control report. It seemed as though it sounded like that those things really helped. The curtain, the water curtains, they broke up the fire mains into 8 sections as opposed to 4 to relieve the stress. When you have 8 instead of 4, you're taking away twice the pressure or something. They had more respirators on board, but he just kind of said straight, nope. Nothing was helpful. And I know it's just conversational and stuff, but
yeah. Well,
I found that interesting.
It was
as a catastrophic.
It's always a risk having somebody like that come on. You never know what you're going to get, right? And I was nervous for it up until we finally got him connected. So you never know what he's going to say. And then once they drop a bomb like that, or a little piece of information like that, it just makes you want to have another episode about it. that's the way I look at it.
Quickly, are we going to mention the LST?
Yeah. I
should have said that earlier.
Should we? Shane, are you aware of the LST
393?
Thank you, 393.
And I don't think so. The ship itself, or what its relation to, or
okay,
real quick.
Yeah, real quick. So,
how do you 3 guys know about it?
I've been on it.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to give a brief overview, and I'm going to refer everybody to unless Connor you say otherwise. I'm going to refer everyone over to the Museum Ships Facebook group, because Connor placed a post on there earlier today about the LST 393, which is on display in Muskegon, Michigan, having an issue. Apparently, the city of Muskegon is threatening to pull funding that they had earmarked for the LST 393. Now, whenever news like this comes up about any museum ship, I kind of want to bring it to the forefront so that people can learn about it, do their own investigation, see how they can support those guys. But there seems to be a little bit of a mixed message, coming out from both sides. Connor, you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, basically, from what I've been able to read in the LST's public posts, it kind of sounded like they were saying that the city was starting to put away the money, because the plan was, and to my knowledge, the LST has not been dry docked since the 40s, and she has considerable problems with her hull, and it sounded like the plan had been to put it up on land, but it's the story they're saying is the city is threatening to pull the funding. The city is saying another story, because you sent them an email, Ken, and they said something else.
Yeah, I emailed the council members. I emailed the mayor. It sounds like Lego History Sam did the same thing. He may have received the same response as I did, but the city has a totally different response to what the representatives of the 393 are saying. So I guess the whole point of bringing this up is people should be aware of it. You know, we don't want these ships to disappear. And obviously we don't want anything to happen to any museum ship like what happened to the Sullivans a little over a year ago in April. So, you know, I definitely want people to support them, but what the whole story is, I think it might be too soon to tell. But yeah. So I would say, if you want to learn more about it, you know, check out the Museum Ship Facebook group, Google the LST 393 and see what news stories come up. Just be aware of it. And that's why Connor and I are bringing it up tonight. Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, sorry. And it's so important to go to the source. Yeah. One of the things that we learned from the sinking was that, you know, the sidewalk superintendents, the armchair admirals, everyone was spreading what their thoughts were. Yeah. And we tried to stay on top, and we appreciate that people came to us directly so that they can get the story and what we're doing. But yeah, please try to go to the source as much as possible, as opposed to conjecture from sidewalk superintendents.
Yeah, I agree. And just last thing of myself, because as far as I'm aware, I'm the only one of us four who's actually been to the LST 393.
I have not been there, no.
Okay. I got a chance to go to it. Last year. I really, ultimately though, regardless of what happens here, I really hope that the history is preserved, because when I was there, the entire tank deck was turned into a museum space. Like it's beautiful in there. And I just really hope that whatever happens, the ship ends up in a good home, in a good place, and preferably potentially out of the water, because that was what their plan was. Because stuff like that is just so hard to replace. Like with submarines in the U.S., there's how many? 13 of them in the U.S. at least, or more. I'm not exactly sure how many. But LSTs, I think there's only 2 in the U.S. and I think only one's running. Like they are such a rare thing. And it's, to me, it's like to lose that potentially would be devastating to this community.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, definitely. So look up the LST 393. Like Shane says, go to the source, try and learn as much as you can and support them any way that you can. And yeah, I think that's about as much as we can say about that right now. Probably more to come for sure.
We'll keep it all posted.
Yeah. So if there is anything else, I'll just say for everybody that tuned in to us tonight, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to author P.T. Duderman talk about his book, Trial by Fire. If you want to check out his book, I believe the link is available in the description of this video below. So definitely want to say thanks to P.T. Duderman for joining us. And as you know, not to repeat myself, but I will anyway, thank you for joining us. You guys are the reason we do this. Without you guys watching, it's not possible for us to put this together. So we definitely appreciate you tuning in tonight. And for audio versions of this podcast, search for Museum Ship Mafia on your favorite podcast platform. My name is Ken Stano with the YouTube channel History X. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.